I'm hearing a lot about how LGBTQ kids and adults are at risk for suicide. And it's because community doesn't support them or they're not being accepted at home. And I just want to comment on something that I've been seeing over the last few years. The LGBTQ community used to be very loving and tolerant. They used to welcome allies. They used to really be about education and letting LGBTQ kids know that they were okay. What I'm seeing now is trans activists infiltrating a lot of LGBTQ support groups and other organizations. And trans activists are changing the way these support groups work. Rather than being a loving and welcoming place, they're often fostering a lot of anger and contention. They're also telling children that they are at risk of suicide if certain things happen, such as if their parents don't affirm their gender identity or sexual orientation, or if somebody dead names them, or if somebody misgenders them. They are teaching children that these things are violence against them, tantamount to being physically violated. Now, I understand that feelings get hurt, and part of being a kid is getting your feelings hurt. And I think it's great that we've worked as a society to try and minimize bullying and try to promote acceptance. But what's happening is that we're creating a whole group of especially trans kids that are incredibly fragile, who are encouraged to embrace and almost inflate their feelings of gender dysphoria in order to be accepted. And what I'm thinking about is how easy it is for a kid who doesn't fit in very well, who maybe doesn't have great social skills, to want to become a part of a group like that, because that group is so supportive of the child in a not very healthy way. I've been listening to a lot of videos by detransitioners and based on my own experience with the local trans community. And my experience has been that the trans activists are really promoting hatred. They're promoting the idea that natally born people who don't have gender dysphoria are privileged, and that as a child with gender dysphoria, they are going to have very sensitive feelings that are hurt easily, feelings that can lead to suicide. I have some experience with suicide. When I was a child, I came home, I was probably about 7, and there was an ambulance in front of my house, and my mom had attempted suicide again. My brother was suicidal. There were times when I was in high school and I was suicidal. And here's the thing about suicide. First of all, it's contagious, and they've shown that if somebody in a peer group kills themselves, somebody else in the peer group is more likely to kill themselves. It can also be a social contagion. So if you talk about children who are transgender or have gender dysphoria, if you tell them that if their families don't accept them, if you tell them that society doesn't accept them, if you tell them that their feelings are hurt every time somebody doesn't act respectfully towards them and that they're vulnerable, they are then less mentally healthy. What you're doing is you're taking away their sense of control. You're teaching them that they live in a hostile world and that their feelings are not within their control. And I want to kind of give an example of this. As someone with gender dysphoria, especially now that I'm an adult and I manage it, it's mostly resolved. But because I decided to act like a boy for so many years and present myself as a boy for so many years, there are things about me that are masculine, I don't fit in as well with women. And it could be that I would have been that way anyway. And but I doubt it. I think that my brain was actually reprogrammed somewhat because I presented as a male for so many years and insisted I was a boy for so many years, and tried to model my behavior on what I saw as stereotypical boy behavior. And so after years and years and years of having that kind of socialization, of having my brain kind of pattern on that behavior, I tend to act more like a male in some situations. And just to give you an example, I was at a meeting one day at work, and I interrupted somebody. And men interrupt people all the time. And this is just a sexist thing about men and women, that men interrupt people and that's okay, but if a woman interrupts somebody, it's seen as rude. And I had a choice about how to respond to the criticism I got for interrupting somebody. I actually got written up. I got a verbal reprimand, or a written reprimand, because I interrupted somebody in a meeting. And in my view, I wasn't rude. In my view, I was behaving appropriately. I believe that the reason it was seen as rude is because I'm a female. I'm a small, petite female. I think that if one of the larger men had done exactly the same thing, nobody would have even batted an eye. And I could have decided that I was being discriminated against and life sucked and the world wasn't fair, and I could have felt really crappy about it. And I could have internalized that and decided that no matter what I did, I wasn't going to fit in, that my whole life I've never fit in, that I just don't get social norms. And I could have felt really crappy and gotten depressed. Or I could have looked at it and said, that's kind of funny. And it is kind of funny. I do think it's kind of funny. And these are the way we respond to things. So as a child, I was bullied like crazy because I presented as a boy. A lot of times, a group of girls would physically kind of corral me into a boys' restroom and push me in and then hold the door shut. And it's funny because I think that most girls would totally freak out if that happened, but I was more like curious about what the boys' bathroom was like inside. Now, after that experience, I could have decided that I was being bullied and felt really crappy about it, or I could have moved on. And I didn't have a lot of support. My mother was quite mentally ill. My stepfather worked 2 jobs. My brother and I did not get along at all. In fact, he was somewhat abusive to me. So I didn't have support systems. And I'm not saying that just because I made it through, anybody can make it through. But what I'm saying is that the stories that we tell ourselves and the way we respond to things and the people we're around really impact how we manage stuff that happens to us. Another thing is, my dad doesn't want anything to do with me. I've reached out to him a number of times, and he and I have been estranged for 25, 30 years, something like that. And it sucks. I wish that we could have a relationship, but we don't. And that's something that I could feel really crappy about, or I can kind of process it and move on. So what I think is happening is that a lot of the trans activists, instead of helping children learn how to process things and move on, they're encouraging children to feel like there's something wrong with society. And that the only way to solve that is to legislate against it and to have people treat them exactly how they want to be treated. And the fact is nobody gets treated how they want to be treated. That everybody deals with crap all the time. And it's not a function of being gender dysphoric or transgender or LGBT or a woman or black. Sometimes these things can exacerbate how we're treated, but everybody gets treated like crap. We all have our crap that we deal with. I am short. I get teased for being short. When I was in college, I got put in the dryer because people thought that was funny because I was short. So we all have these like crap that we have to deal with. Some people are heavy. Some people are not very smart. Some people aren't very attractive. Some people don't have good social skills. We all have to deal with kind of the crap that we're born with. There are people these trans activists are telling children with gender dysphoria that in order to resolve their dysphoria, all they have to do is act and present in stereotypical behaviors of the opposite gender. And that's not what makes gender. What makes gender is growing up in a certain body. what makes gender is having the experience of being either male or female from the time you're born. What makes gender is our interactions with other people and how they respond to us as gender. So as long as I'm on this rant, I'm also going to start ranting about, this is one of my pet peeves, about the transgender community. And I see it regularly, and it drives me crazy. And that is the sense of them being picked on. Trans women especially will post, somebody stared at me, somebody was looking at me, oh my gosh. I'm like, that's kind of what being a woman is like. You wanted to be a woman, guess what? This is what it's like. It's having catcalls, it's having people stare at you, maybe having somebody slap your butt when you don't want them to, maybe somebody calling you honey or baby or sweetheart. This is part of being a woman, and if you don't like it, don't transition. If you don't like it, fight for women's rights rather than trying to take our rights away, which is exactly what I see happening. I constantly am hearing people say, well, think of what it's like for the trans person who has to go into a bathroom and how uncomfortable they are. And nobody's saying, think of what it's like for a woman who's biologically female, who was sexually assaulted as a child, to have to go into bathrooms where there are biological males. I'll tell you, it sucks. But I'm called a transphobe for saying that. So I have the unique experience of having had gender dysphoria and having been sexually assaulted. So I get both sides. I really do. I get what it's like to have gender dysphoria. I get what it's like to hate your body, to feel completely uncomfortable in it, to think that if you could just change it, then you would feel better. I get that. But I also get what it's like to feel incredibly vulnerable around biological males. So, this has been kind of a long and digressive lecture, but I've got a couple of things I really want to summarize with. First of all, if you tell a child from the time they're little until they're an adult that they are fragile, that having somebody hurt their feelings will cause them mental distress, then you're going to grow up with you're going to have an individual who is incredibly anxious, possibly depressed, possibly suicidal. We can train people to have good mental health by teaching them coping mechanisms. And these coping mechanisms are exactly the kinds of things that trans activists are trying to take away. They are trying to legislate that therapists cannot teach children these coping mechanisms. They cannot teach children how to resolve their dysphoria. Instead, therapists have to affirm it. And so this is actually potentially going to result in a lot of damage to these kids. In addition, someone with gender dysphoria hates their body. So if you have somebody affirming that hatred, that you are in the wrong body, you're actually encouraging that mental disconnect. You're encouraging them to hate their body. You're encouraging them to feel like there's something wrong with them. So trans support groups that I'm seeing are really good at this. They talk about their dysphoria all the time. They say, oh my gosh, I was misgendered. I'm having such bad dysphoria. Or, oh my gosh, the shirt that I'm wearing, I feel like I'm really having a lot of dysphoria. And they talk about this dysphoria. They almost brag about it, like, I'm so dysphoric today. And it really pisses me off because a lot of these guys that I'm reading about have just recently decided that they don't identify as the sex they were born. I grew up with it. I've had it since I was 6 years old. Okay? I know what it's like to have dysphoria, and I don't go around being like, oh my gosh, that person just made me so dysphoric. I own my dysphoria because I want to be empowered, because I don't want somebody telling me that I have to feel bad because somebody misgendered me or called me by the wrong name. These are things that we choose to be hurt by. And I think we're encouraging children to be very sensitive and to be hurt. And we're actually causing increased risk of anxiety and depression. And they've recently done studies, and especially girls these days, younger girls have a much higher rate of anxiety and depression than they ever used to have. And I think that's because we're teaching them to be fragile. And Jonathan Haidt talked about this a little bit in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. But I think for the trans groups, it goes deeper than that. Because in order for the trans, it's like if someone like me challenges their narrative that gender dysphoria is a mental illness, that you can't be born in the wrong body, it's almost like a religious cult. Then I'm challenging their sacred doctrine. And I am using my lived experience to say, hey, guess what? It can be a mental illness. It is indicative of a mental illness. In fact, it's sort of the definition of a mental illness, that you believe something that's not true. And trans activists have done an amazing job of convincing society that it's transphobic to speak the truth, and that children who are gender dysphoric should transition and affirm their dysphoric feelings rather than get help for them. So if you are a younger transgendered person, if you're a younger person with gender dysphoria, my heart goes out to you. I understand how difficult it is. And I'm telling you, you probably have it your whole life. I have periods where I forget that I am dysphoric, where I'm very happy and comfortable and satisfied. And I have periods where I am extremely uncomfortable in my body, and I have those feelings of dysphoria. And when I do, I talk to my therapist about it, and we come up with a plan. And a lot of that plan has to do with, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, it's the stories we tell ourselves, and it's also grounding. So a lot of the anxiety that people feel that they're saying is dysphoria caused by somebody misgendered them something, it's anxiety. It's anxiety because you're feeling this dis-ease, like you're being challenged. And it's normal to have people challenge you. It's really kind of abnormal to want to live in a world where you're never offended. That's actually abnormal. And though it would be maybe great if we could live in that world, it's actually not good for our mental health. We need to be pushed and challenged. We need to be uncomfortable at times. And when I'm feeling really anxious, when I'm feeling really disconnected from my body, when I'm feeling really dysphoric, I have learned to ground myself. And there are simple things that I can do to make me realize that this is the body I'm in, and it's the right body I'm in because it's the only body I get. And no matter how much I change it cosmetically, no matter how much I present differently, this is my body. So I might as well love it the way it is rather than try and force it to change. So I do things like sip a cup of coffee and appreciate the feeling of the warmth and the bitter and the flavor. And I go outside and I breathe and I use my lungs to pull in the air and feel the sun on my skin and do things that require me to feel like I'm in my body. So get away from social media, get off the internet, and get into your body. Do things that make you remember that this body you have is beautiful and wonderful and enables you to be in the world in a most fantastic way. And there will be shit, I assure you. And it sucks. Like, growing up with a mother who attempted suicide on a regular basis sucked. Having a father who wants nothing to do with me sucks. Having been sexually assaulted when I was 6 sucked. I've had a number of other really sucky experiences. And it would be nice if people didn't have sucky experiences. But those sucky experiences don't have to defeat you. And you don't have to define yourself by how society chooses to you don't have to define yourself based on your trauma. You don't have to define yourself based on the perceived bullying, the perceived insults. And the fact is if you're transitioned, you're going to look different. And people are going to stare at you. And that's not because they're assholes or because they're transphobic. It's because people look at things that are interesting. And people who have transitioned are interesting. Just like a beautiful woman is interesting. Just like if I walk down the street naked, that would be interesting. And remember that it may not even be judgment. It might just be interest. And I'll tell you, as someone who lacks social skills, my son on a regular basis will say, hey, Mom, you're staring at that person. Because I do. When I'm interested in something, I stare. And I don't even realize I'm doing it. So I'm not trying to be a jerk. I just start looking at people and I'm like, wow. And I just kind of get lost in looking at them. And that's a poor social skill on my part, but it doesn't mean that I'm a jerk. So a lot of times, there are going to be people who are going to be rude to you. There are going to be people who are going to be assholes. There are going to be people who are really mean. In my case, I've got a whole group of people in the local trans community that want to hurt me, who have said that they're violent against me. And I am now living with the constant kind of acceptance that at some point they're going to hurt me. The other day I was walking down the street and I thought, I wonder if they're going to throw acid in my face. And I wonder what I'd do. And I started thinking, what would I do if these trans activists throw acid in my face? And I thought, I kind of came up with a plan. Like, I'd put dirt on my face because water might make it worse. So I'm actually thinking about this. I'm pretty aware that I'm in danger based on the threats that I've gotten and based on things other people have told me, that there are people in the community that want to hurt me. And I could feel like a victim here. I could feel like, oh my gosh, poor me. But I'm gonna live my life. And I'm gonna have weird thoughts like, if they throw acid in my face, what should I do? Or I wonder if they're gonna like beat me up, or I wonder if they're gonna try and hurt my dog. Like, I have these thoughts because as a result of me talking about my gender dysphoria as a mental illness, and me talking about the fact that I don't want children to medically transition, to be put on puberty blockers, to skip puberty. Okay, so if you put a child on a puberty blocker, what happens is that they're almost 100% likely to go on cross-gender hormones. They never get to go through natural puberty. Never. That child skips puberty. Even though puberty sucks, I don't know about you, but it did for me. Even though puberty sucks, it is essential. It's a time when your body and your mind matures. You emotionally mature, you physically mature. If you skip that, your body's messed up. So I am saying I care about children. I don't want them to treat a mental illness as if I don't want their mental illness to be reinforced. I don't want them to be put on medications that are going to harm their bodies forever. And for this, trans activists have told me that they want to hurt me. And so my advice is, speak your truth, live your life, and understand that when you have a mental illness, it sucks, but there's help out there for you. And getting involved with people who are reinforcing hatred, who are reinforcing negative feelings about you, who are teaching you to be hurt, that you're fragile, that you're emotionally unstable, that things other people do can cause you to be suicidal, those are people you need to stay away from. There are some predators who are acting as if they're advocates and allies and activists in the trans movement, and they are predators, and I know they're predators, and I've seen them before, and they're dangerous. And they are actually preying on children. They're bringing children into these transgender support groups, and then they are hurting them both psychologically and sometimes physically. Because for some reason, it's okay if you convince a girl to transition, and she's a trans guy now, then a trans woman who's 20, 30, 40 years older than her can talk her into having sex with them. And that's exploitation. And I'm not saying that happens in every trans group, but I am seeing some trans activists, some local trans activists who are preying on children, and they're teaching these children to be angry and hateful and to hate their bodies and to hate other people and to assume that other people are transphobic and bigots. And some of these are kids that my children grew up with, and they are not hateful people, but they are now, because they've been told that someone like me is a transphobe, which is equivalent to a Nazi, and Nazis deserve to be hurt and killed. And this is the narrative that these children are being taught by trans activists. So as a society, we need to support kids with gender dysphoria. We need to give them lots of support systems so that they can learn how to manage it. And we need to keep them away from the idea of thinking that they were born in the wrong body. Because once a child goes down that route, they have a tough road ahead of them. And it's not a positive road, it's not a healthy and healing road, it's kind of a road to hell.